Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayh. Wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. Wa nashhadu anna sayyidina wa nabiyyina wa maulana Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. وصلى الله تبارك وتعالى عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We concluded last week's lesson by looking at the incident, by looking at the moment when Sayyiduna Yusuf alayhi salam was admitted into prison. The day Sayyiduna Yusuf alayhi salam was admitted to prison, two other people also entered the prison as well. One of them was the Saqiul Khamar, the cupbearer of the king, and the other was the Khabbaz, the Tabbah, the cook of the king. And these two, the Saqiul Khamar, the cupbearer, and also the cook, they have both been accused of trying to poison the king. So their case was under investigation, was under review, and because of that reason, they also went to prison as well. Now, prison life is not actually a very nice place. Prison is not a place where youngsters or Muslims in particular should aspire to. Unfortunately, what the case is nowadays is that many of our Muslim youth, they think that they've achieved something by going into prison. But actually, someone who's noble, someone who's pious, prison life or prison is not something which is nice. So Yusuf alayhi salam, whilst he was in prison, he tried his best to make everyone happy. Everyone was all sad there. He tried his best to make people happy. He would try to tell them about deen, about religion. He would keep everyone's spirit up. Now the story then continues that the two people who entered prison with Sayyiduna Yusuf alayhi salam, the cupbearer and the cook, they saw a dream. According to Ibn Abbas anhu, it's mentioned that they saw a dream, whereas according to another very famous companion, Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, he is of the opinion that they did not see a dream, but they just kind of made up something. They just like made something up, and they came to Yusuf alayhi salam and they said that, "Oh Yusuf, we saw a dream." Now you may be thinking to yourselves that why on earth the cupbearer and the cook would make something up and then go to Yusuf alayhi salam and tell him that we saw a dream. Now it's similar to the reason I mentioned in last week's lesson about when the Jews came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they wanted to check or verify whether Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a true prophet and a messenger of Allah. So they asked him a tricky question. They asked him about Yusuf alayhi salam and about his brothers and about his father and about his story, why he left Canaan and why he went to Egypt. So similarly, these two prisoners, they saw Yusuf alayhi salam. They heard that he was very noble. They heard about his expertise when he came to interpreting dreams. So according to Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu's opinion, these two prisoners wanted to check Yusuf alayhi salam out. They wanted to check whether he's actually what he says on the tin, whether he's actually, can he interpret dreams properly or not. So they went to Yusuf alayhi salam and they narrated something which they saw. So according to Abdullah bin Mas'ud, he says that they didn't see a dream, they just made something up, and they came to Yusuf alayhi salam and they said, "We saw this, give us the interpretation." Whereas Ibn Abbas who is of the opinion that no, they actually saw a dream. Now what did they see? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ أَحَدُهُمَا إِنِّي أَرَانِي أَعْصِرُ خَمْرًا. So one of them goes to Yusuf alayhi salam and he says that in my dream, I saw that I was squeezing the grapes and making wine. وَقَالَ الْآخَرُ, and the other person said that I saw in my dream فَوْقَ رَأْسِي خُبْزًا, that I was carrying bread on top of my head, تَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ, and birds were coming and they were eating from the bread which was on top of my head. نَبِّئْنَا بِتَعْوِيلِ, O Yusuf, tell us the interpretation of the dreams. So the two dreams. So one of them said, I saw in my dream squeezing the grapes and making wine for my master, for the king. And the other person narrates that I saw in my dream that I was carrying some bread and birds were coming and they were eating from the bread which was on top of my head. Now the next part of the paragraph in the Holy Quran goes on to explain something which was totally away or totally out of context with the question the cupbearer and the cook asked. Basically, they came to Yusuf and they wanted to know a dream interpretation. But actually, Yusuf alayhi salam did not give them a dream interpretation straight away. He actually took the opportunity to give them da'wah, to tell them about the oneness of Allah, to tell them that, because remember Egypt at that time was an idol worshipping country. So he told them that, look, what you worshipping is wrong and you need to believe in the oneness of Allah. You need to believe that only one God exists. Thereafterwards you will see barakah, then thereafterwards you will see a fruitful life. And from this the ulamas, the scholars, have derived a very beautiful point, which is that da'wah or preaching is not just restricted to the masajids, is not just restricted in the conference halls or in the lecture stages, but da'wah should be given wherever and whenever. And sometimes da'wah given outside, whether it's on the street or whether it's at work, is more conducive, is more better than giving da'wah in the masjid. Sometimes when it's given outside, in front of friends, colleagues and so on, because it's like a neutral environment, they feel more at ease and they tend to listen to you more, rather than say if it was in a masjid where people are looking at you, they sometimes feel a bit intimidated. So what we can derive from here is that da'wah should not just be given in the masjid and that's it, but it should be given in all situations and it should be given at every single opportunity available. Now sometimes this is like more nasiha and advice for the imams and the scholars. That sometimes what happens is that people, they will come to you for questions. People come to me for questions, whether it's brothers about marital issues, sisters about marital or divorce issues. What this particular paragraph is telling us is that we shouldn't just give them the answer. We shouldn't just give them the answer, shake their hands and say, okay, I'll see you next time. But what this paragraph is telling us is that we should actually take this opportunity to give them da'wah. Because look, when they've come to you for a problem, whatever you tell them, they're going to do. So that is the best opportunity, the best time to give them da'wah and to bring them more closer towards deen. Many times it happens when sometimes brothers they phone, sisters they phone and say, well, husband's giving me talaq or husband's giving me divorce. So obviously I give them the answer, whether divorce has happened or not. I give them the answer that this is what you need to do. But thereafterwards I always ask the question that, brother or sister, how punctual you are in your namaz. And the answer I will generally get is, well, Mufti Saab, once a day, twice a day. Some brothers will say, sometimes at Jummah, sometimes at Eid. Now if brothers and sisters are not regularly praying their salah, how on earth do you expect there to be barakah and blessings in your marriage? How on earth do you then expect there to be barakah and mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your dealings? How on earth then do you expect there to be barakah at home? It is obvious that you're going to be going through difficulties in your marriage. It is obvious that you're going to be going difficulty through father and son and mothers and daughters. Why? Because you're not praying salah. Because there's no barakah at home. There's no blessings at home. There's no spirituality in your iman. How on earth is there going to be any barakah and blessings? So sometimes when people come for questions, we shouldn't just give them the answer, shake their hands, say Jazakallah, Khuda Hafiz, and then just send them out of the door. But instead what we should do, take the opportunity to give them da'wah, tell them about deen, tell them about religion, tell them about the importance of salah, about the importance of zakat, about the importance of fasting, the importance of following the Quran and following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And because remember at that time, they will listen to what you say. Because they've reached the level and the lowest ebb. So they'll listen to what you say. Obviously it doesn't mean that you take advantage of them. But no, they listen to you, so you use that moment to give them da'wah, try to bring them towards deen. So exactly in this case here, the two people that came, Yusuf alayhi salam could have just given the interpretation and said, Bas Jazakallah, see you tomorrow. But instead, Yusuf alayhi salam took the opportunity to give them da'wah, tell them about deen, tell them about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to refrain from shirk. After he gave the advice and the nasiha and he gave the da'wah, thereafterwards Yusuf alayhi salam then gave the interpretation of the dream. And the interpretation Yusuf alayhi salam gave was that one of you, amma ahadukuma, one of you will continue squeezing the grapes for his master. In other words, one of you will be alive and one of you will continue what you were doing. Whereas the other, fayuslab, will be crucified. So one of you will basically survive and you live, whereas the other, he will be killed and he will be crucified. Now from there the scholars have derived another beautiful point, because when we look at the verse itself, Yusuf alayhi salam didn't point to anyone. He didn't say, oh, you are going to die and you are going to be alive. He didn't say that, oh, you're going to get killed and you are going to survive. He just said one of you is going to be alive and one of you is going to lose their life. So from this the scholars have derived a beautiful point, and that is that when it comes to giving bad news, then give the bad news in a way which is less painful to that person. i.e., don't be very blunt and straightforward in giving or conveying the bad news. Give the news, but give it in a way which is not painful, which is not harsh, and which is not blunt for that individual. So in this very example here, Yusuf alayhi salam, he gave the interpretation. He said one of you will survive, the other one will be crucified, but he didn't exactly say who he was. Now the story continues that as Yusuf alayhi salam predicted, the cook was convicted of trying to poison the king. He was found guilty, he was killed, he was crucified. Whereas the cupbearer, he was found to be not guilty in trying to poison the king, and he got let off. He was freed from prison, and he then continued with his old job in terms of squeezing the grapes and making wine for the king and for his master. On the way out of prison, Yusuf alayhi salam said to the cupbearer that, can you put a good word in for me to your master? In the Rabbi. In other words, say something nice about me. Say there's this person, Yusuf, in the prison. He was wrongly convicted of trying to seduce his master's wife, i.e. Zulaykha, which we touched on in last week's lesson. And he's wrongly been convicted. He's in prison now. He's a very nice person. He's a very noble person. Put a nice word in for me to your king. So the cupbearer promised Yusuf alayhi salam that yes, definitely I will. Then the verse continues by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying, فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانِ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ. That shaitan made that person forget to put a good word in for Yusuf alayhi salam in front of his master. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. And Yusuf alayhi salam remained in prison for a number of years. Now question arises, or if you just think for a moment, some of you may be thinking that how on earth could that cupbearer forget about Yusuf alayhi salam? Now I'll give you an example. If it's say like for example a masjid, or just say a place where people come in and out, just say like a masjid or supermarkets or stores or grocery stores and shops and so on, people come in and out. You meet someone, you say hi, hello, you just get to know them a bit, and then afterwards he goes, you go your separate way. You don't have any contacts or relations with that person anymore. But when you say, for example, being in a place together for many years, I'll give you an example of a boarding school, like a madrasa, where you're with students, 200 students, 300 students, 400 students, and you're there for 10 years of your life. You may lose contact with that person, but you won't forget him. You know, if that person was a roommate for 10 years, you're not going to forget him, are you? You may lose contact, but you're not going to forget him. You know, there may be someone in your class, you may lose contact, but you're not going to forget him. Now the question arises here is that in prison, remember, you're in a prison, so it's not like they could go anywhere. So they built, obviously there was a connection there between Yusuf alayhi salam and this cupbearer. As I was explaining before, Yusuf alayhi salam was the person who was trying to keep everyone's spirit up in prison. He was trying to be kind, he was trying to give da'wah to all the people who were there. So you may be thinking that how on earth could the cupbearer, and it was because of Yusuf alayhi salam's dream interpretation that was the catalyst for the cupbearer to leave prison. How on earth could the cupbearer forget about Yusuf? Alright, fair enough, there's no contact, but how on earth could he just forget about him? So the answer, which is mentioned in the books of tafsir, the reason why he forgot, it wasn't like he intentionally forgot. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him forget. Why? Why did Allah make that cupbearer forget? Is to teach Yusuf alayhi salam a lesson. And what was the lesson here? The lesson is that he, being a prophet and a nabi, should have asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, should have prayed to Allah, oh Allah, can you take me out of prison? And he shouldn't have asked an ordinary person like a cupbearer, or can you sort it out, can you take me out of prison? So because of that reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made that cupbearer forget. So the key or the moral, what we can understand, or the scholars have derived from here, is that whenever we are in trouble, we should always resort to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to anybody else. I'll just mention a point here. Like obviously sometimes brothers, sisters, they always mention this, or Mufti Sahib, we make dua, but we find our dua never being accepted. You know, people say that, you know, our duas are never accepted. Now scholars have written that if you want your duas to be accepted, when you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you should make dua in such a way that only Allah can help you. Only Allah can do it for you. The problem is that we may be going through some financial problems, say for argument's sake. We do dua to Allah, that Allah, can you ease our financial burden? But back of our mind, we then think to ourselves, oh, you know what, I'll borrow £100 from my brother, and then I'll pay off the bill. Or I'll borrow £200 from such and such a person, and I'll pay off the bill. Then in that situation, in that way, Allah's going to not take out your financial burden. So when you pray to Allah, whatever it's for, whether it's financial problems, whether it's marital problems, whether it's other problems, you should always pray to Allah, ask Allah, as He's the one who's going to sort you out. There's nobody else. If you do dua to Allah, but at the back of your mind, you have that belief that somebody else will sort you out, then that dua will never ever be accepted. So exactly here with Yusuf alayhi salam, that Allah wanted to teach him a lesson, because he's a prophet. He's supposed to show examples for others, that he shouldn't have asked an ordinary person to help him or to sort him out, but instead he should have asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the story continues. As I mentioned in last week's lesson, that Yusuf alayhi salam was in the care, or was in the house of the finance minister. Afterwards there was that incident which led him to go to prison. But remember, the finance minister, and I think I did mention this point last week as well, he's not the king of Egypt. He was just like a minister who was in charge of the finance and the treasury. The king of Egypt, his name was Rayyan bin Walid. Rayyan. So he was the king of Egypt. So the story continues that this king of Egypt, one night he sees a dream. And in his dream, he sees 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows, skinny cows. So he sees 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows. And he also sees that these 7 lean cows are eating up the 7 fat cows. He also sees in his dream 7 green ears of grains and 7 dry ears of grains. So 7 green ears, in other words, like fresh grains, and 7 dry ears of grains. So he sees that in his dream. So the following morning, he asks all his ministers that yesterday night I saw this dream. Is there any one of you who could interpret this dream for me? So they all replied by saying, Adghathu ahlam. Oh, you don't have to worry. It's like a mumble jumble of a dream. You know, there's no interpretation. It's one of those like dreams we sometimes have after a long night. So, you know, just like we see random things and so on. So they were saying to the king that, look, you don't have to worry. This is one of those mumble jumbles of a dream. There's no specific or particular interpretation for this dream. Now the cupbearer, who remember saw a dream which Yusuf alayhi salam interpreted, which came out to be true. He overheard this dream the king had, and he overheard the king requesting anyone to give an interpretation for him. So the cupbearer, he then approaches the king and he says that if you allow me, if you permit me, if you allow me, I will get the interpretation of this dream for you. I will go to someone and I will get this interpretation. So the king allowed the cupbearer. The cupbearer, he went to Yusuf alayhi salam and he asked him for the interpretation of that dream. Now subhanallah, when we look through the Quranic verse, when that cupbearer came, Yusuf alayhi salam didn't say anything to him. He didn't say to him that, oh, by the way, you're supposed to sort me out, where's he gone? Now, before you're gonna, take me out of prison, before you're gonna sort me out and do something for me, is he like that now? Nothing like that. Yusuf alayhi salam gave the interpretation straight away. And we call those people who remind others of their favors as mannan. And it's mentioned in a hadith of Sahih Muslim, La yadkhulul jannata mannanun, which means that somebody who reminds people of their favors will not enter Jannah. So you've done a favor to someone, then you'll get the reward in the hereafter. But don't go around and reminding him every 10 seconds or giving him a text or something like, I've done a favor to you and so on. You don't need to do that every 10 seconds or every 20 seconds or every now and then. So here, when that cupbearer came to Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf alayhi salam didn't mention anything about, well, you were going to sort me out and so on, what took you so long, 7 years had passed, because it was actually 7 years since the cupbearer leaving prison and him coming back to Yusuf alayhi salam. So 7 long years had passed. So Yusuf alayhi salam was asking that, look, I thought you're gonna, no, nothing like that from Yusuf alayhi salam's side. So when he came with the interpretation, with the dream, Yusuf alayhi salam gave the interpretation of the dream. Now what interpretation did Yusuf alayhi salam give? Now Yusuf alayhi salam said that the 7 fat cows the king saw, and the 7 fresh or green ears of grain, that signals 7 years of rain or 7 years of good crops. In other words, 7 years, the first 7 years there will be good crops, good grains, heavy rains, and the 7 lean cows and the 7 dry ears of grains signals 7 years of famine, harsh, severe famine. So this is what Yusuf alayhi salam said. The fat cows, the green grains, the green ears of grains, that signals 7 years of good crops, good grains, 7 years of heavy rain, and the 7 lean cows indicates the 7 years of harsh, severe famine. And as for the lean cows eating the fat cows, the interpretation Yusuf alayhi salam gave was that during the 7 years of severe famine, the grains or the crops stored by the people during the 7 years of good famine, 7 years of good crops, that will be consumed during the 7 years of famine. So that was the interpretation Yusuf alayhi salam gave. That the lean cows eating the fat cows, what it means is that during the 7 years of famine, the people, because they're hungry, so that's the meaning of lean, they will be eating the grains and the crops which they had stored in the previous 7 years when the rains were heavy, when the crops were in its abundance. So that was the interpretation and the ta'bir, the ta'wil given by Yusuf alayhi salam. The cupbearer, he went back to the king, he told the king. Now when the king heard this beautiful, amazing interpretation, he now wanted to meet Yusuf alayhi salam. Sometimes it happens that you may see someone or you hear someone, especially nowadays with internet and so on. It's very easy to listen to scholars and shuyukhs all over the world. So there may be a particular scholar or sheikh whose talk or lecture you heard. You haven't met him, you haven't actually seen him live or face to face or directly, but the way he speaks, he has an effect in your heart, and you now want to meet that person. You just long to meet that particular person. So similarly, the king, when he heard these wise words from Yusuf alayhi salam, he just wanted to meet Yusuf alayhi salam. He was like, when can I meet him? I want to see him. I want to, where is he? Where is this person? Where did you get this interpretation from? So the king said, look, he's in prison. So the king asked, okay, in that sense, bring him out of prison. Tell him to come to my palace. I want to see him. I want to see him face to face. I want to discuss this dream interpretation which he has given. So the second time, the king, he sends a messenger, not the cupbearer, somebody else, a messenger, to go to the prison and call for Yusuf alayhi salam. But subhanallah, Yusuf alayhi salam, again, his patience and sabr, he doesn't leave. He goes that I am not going to leave the prison unless my case is thoroughly investigated. Unless my case, what was his case? His case was him being wrongly, or him being accused, I should say, of trying to seduce Zulaykha. He wanted that to be thoroughly investigated. And he goes that when that is thoroughly investigated, only then I will leave prison and then I'll come and see your king. Otherwise, I'm going to be here. And this led to one of the very famous hadiths. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, it's a hadith of Tirmidhi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if I was in the position of Yusuf alayhi salam and the messenger of the king had called me, had summoned me for my release, I would have gone. I would have accepted that call. But Yusuf alayhi salam, his sabr was of a next level, that he did not accept that call for his release. He said that I will only leave the prison until my case is thoroughly investigated. Only then I will leave the prison. Now you may be thinking that, why did Yusuf alayhi salam take that particular option? Because as I was explaining before, that prison life is not something which is a nice place, especially for a prophet like Yusuf alayhi salam. He should never ever be in a prison. So you may be thinking that if Yusuf alayhi salam is in a prison, somebody's come and is basically telling him to leave prison, why didn't he leave straight away? Why was he adamant that, no, I'm going to stay here until my case is thoroughly investigated and examined? Now the reason why Yusuf alayhi salam didn't want to leave straight away is because Yusuf alayhi salam knew that the king was going to give him a very high responsibility, was going to make him basically a minister, a finance minister. And Yusuf alayhi salam didn't want to take that responsibility with this storm in the background. Oh, he was the one who tried to seduce Zulaykha. And sometimes it happens nowadays as well that even though there may be someone who may have committed a mistake before, he's done tawbah and so on, but then when he is then given a responsibility, people still talk about what he did 10 years ago. People still talk about what he did 20 years ago. So they don't look at the responsibility or the job he's doing. They look at, oh, what he did 20 years ago, or what he did 30 years ago, or he was a druggie 30 years ago. How can we trust him, and so on. So here Yusuf alayhi salam, he knew that I was going to be made a finance minister, so I didn't want to take this responsibility, but people in the background talking behind my back that, oh well, he was the one who's trying to tempt, Zulaykha, trying to tempt his master's wife whilst the master wasn't there, and now look at him, he's got the job of the master. His master, who was a finance minister before, he's got his job and he's got his responsibility. So because Yusuf alayhi salam, he wanted a clean slate. He didn't want anyone to pick any holes. And that's why when we look at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, from the very beginning, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never ever committed shirk. Allah kept him away from shirk. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam never ever drank alcohol, even though alcohol was allowed. He never ever drank it. At the very beginning we're talking about. They find nothing about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, nauzubillah, stealing or committing adultery. Why? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam away from these things? Is because Allah knew that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is made a prophet and a messenger, people then can't say, well, why should we believe in you because you before used to worship idols? Why should we believe in you because you before used to commit zina, nauzubillah, used to steal? So what happened was, from the very beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala kept Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam free from these things. So here Yusuf alayhi salam, he didn't want to take this job and responsibility up, why? Fearing that people may accuse him of something. So that's why he wanted a thorough investigation of the story. So when the messenger went back, the king then carried out a thorough investigation. Obviously the gist or the crux of the investigation found that Yusuf alayhi salam was not guilty. It was actually Zulaykha. She was the one who was trying to tempt Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. When the all clear came from the king's side and from the ministers of the kings, thereafterwards Yusuf alayhi salam, he left prison. Now when Yusuf alayhi salam left prison, he firstly met the king. So the king asked Yusuf alayhi salam for the interpretation of the dream, again the second time. So again Yusuf alayhi salam gave the interpretation. Thereafterwards the king asked Yusuf that, okay, it's a very good interpretation you've given, but how can we implement it? What can we do? Sometimes people, they give a lot of mashwara, a lot of advice that you should do this in your mosque, you should do that in your mosque. But then when you tell them, okay, we need your help now, then no one puts their hands up. So here the interpretation was given. So the king asked Yusuf alayhi salam, okay, what do we then do? You're telling us 7 years of good crops, heavy rain, 7 years of famine. How do we survive? What do we do? So Yusuf alayhi salam then gave a mashwara, a beautiful advice. He said that during the 7 years of heavy rain and good crops, firstly, we have to make sure that every landowner cultivates on every single part of his land. Cultivates on every single juz and part of his land. Now what I mean by that, sometimes it happens that, just say if a person, if he owns a strip of land from here until the end of this room. So sometimes what they do is that they only use half of their land for cultivating, and the other half they just leave it. Sometimes we do a bit of gardening at home, in the garden, so we don't use the entire garden for cultivating, just like at the back somewhere we use a bit of land for gardening. So sometimes landowners do this, that they don't use their entire land for cultivating. So Yusuf alayhi salam said that, look, because these 7 years is going to be good rain, good crops, we have to, cultivate to its maximum. So he said that every landowner has to cultivate every single part of his land. Also, he gave advice that when they cultivate, then a certain percent they should keep themselves, and certain percent they should then give it to the Egyptian government, to the treasury, the Baytul Mal if you want to call it. So a certain percent should go there. Thereafterwards, Yusuf alayhi salam then said that those who are poor, those who are needy, they could come to the central treasury, to the Baytul Mal, and we would give them some grains and crops free of charge. And anyone who comes outside of Egypt wanting food, wanting grains and crops, we will give it to them, but we will charge them a nominal fee. So that was the advice given by Yusuf alayhi salam. That we take the crops, the grains, we store it, they themselves will store it, we will store it in the central treasury. Anyone from Egypt who comes, will give it to them for free, and anyone who comes from outside Egypt, we will charge them. So again, when the king heard this particular mashwara, he was over the moon. It was amazing, and obviously Yusuf alayhi salam being a prophet, it was all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and only Allah can give wise words. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give wise rulings. So when the king heard this, he was like totally amazed, shocked. Amazed and shocked about, wow, what wise words of wisdom. But thereafterwards, he then asked Yusuf alayhi salam another question that, okay, you've, mashallah, said some nice words here. You've given us a nice procedure, a nice system. But who's going to look after it? Who's going to maintain it? Who's going to be responsible for it? Who's going to make sure that the owners are cultivating every single part of their land? Who's going to make sure that they are giving some percentage to the Egyptian government? Who's going to make sure that when the poor people come, we're going to give them something, and people from outside come, we're going to charge them? Who's going to make sure that everything is running smoothly? Because as I explained before, people give nice advice, but it's how you're going to implement all that. Do we have the manpower to implement all this? Who's going to be the responsible person? So when that question came, Yusuf alayhi salam then said, Ij'alni ala khaza'in al-ard inni hafizun alim. That, O king, make me responsible. I'll be in charge. I'll be the finance minister. I'll be in charge of this public treasury. I will make sure that everyone is cultivating their land to their maximum. I will make sure that the poor and the needy get crops and grains. I will make sure that if anybody comes from outside Egypt, I will charge them and I will give them crops and grains. I will take the responsibility. Now from here, a couple of points I would like to discuss or mention. Number one is, there is a hadith a very famous hadith, Sahih Muslim, also from Sunan Abu Dawood and Sunan Tirmizi, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that no one should ask for a responsibility. No one should ask, say for example, to be the minister, or to be the imam, or to be the leader, or to be like the prime minister of a particular country or organization or chairman, whatever. No one should ask for that role or responsibility. And then the hadith goes on to say that if he is given that role by asking for it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unseen help will not come to him. In other words, Allah will not help him. However, if he is given a role of being an imam of a masjid, or being being a minister or a prime minister or chairman and so on and so forth, he is given that role without asking for it, without desiring for it, but the people made him the imam, or the people made him the chairman. So in that situation, it's mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unseen help will come to him. So if you ask for a responsibility, Allah's help will not come. But if you are given it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help would come, because you did not ask or desire for it. Now the question arises here is that this hadith says you shouldn't ask for responsibilities. Why then Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam said to the king that, you know what, make me in charge, I'll sort everything out? Why did he make that particular request to the king? Now the reason why, and scholars have mentioned, that in situations where you think, like you honestly, genuinely think that you're the best person for this role, you honestly and genuinely think that actually there's no other person around, there's no other individual who can read the Holy Quran properly, I personally think that I should be the imam here, or I should lead the prayer. So if it's done genuinely, honestly, like you think that you're the best person for that role, without obviously any corrupt intentions of fame and riyah and show off and so on and so forth, then it is permissible for you to ask for that responsibility. And this not just goes for masjid or imams, by the way, it's just for any other responsibilities in life, whether it's like an organization, whether it's an institute or whatever, or work or anything, promotions, whatever. If you think that you're the best person for that role, and you think that I can only do this role, there's no one else like me, then for you to suggest or put your name forward, that is allowed and that is permissible. And this is exactly what Yusuf alayhi salam did here. Ij'alni ala khaza'in al-ard. Because Yusuf alayhi salam, being a prophet, he will definitely administer justice. Because as you can imagine, and it happens in particular in poor countries in Africa where there's a lot of famine, that what happens is that the rich people during famine always oppress the poor. In other words, they take all the food, the rich take all the food, and the poor, they just like literally are left to dead on the streets and on the roads. We see this like in African countries in particular, where most of the people are dying out of poverty. The rich, they've got so much food and so much money, they live in the palaces, nothing's affected them. But the poor, they just dying on the streets. So Yusuf alayhi salam, being a prophet and being, he's going to administer justice, he knew that if I didn't suggest my name here and I let somebody else take the responsibility, what would happen is that the rich would oppress the poor people would not get their grains and their crops. So Yusuf alayhi salam, to eliminate the oppression and the zulm and to administer justice, he thought that, I'm the best person for this job and for this responsibility. He suggested his name, he put his name forward. And the second point which Yusuf alayhi salam mentions is Inni Hafizun Alim. That why Yusuf alayhi salam should be the finance minister, why he should be in charge of the treasury. Because he is Hafiz, he's a protector, a caretaker. In other words, he's not going to waste the wealth. And Alim, and he is also knowledgeable as well. In other words, he knows what to buy, he knows how to spend it. And remember, these two qualities, Hafiz and Alim, should be the qualities of nowadays modern day trustees of a mosque. The trustees in a mosque who look after the money and the donations and the waqf money, they should have these two qualities. They should be Hafiz. In other words, because what unfortunately happens with donation money, waqf money, is that people treat waqf money as not their own. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that at home, they won't put the heater on. They won't put the radiator on. Why? Because it'll cost. But when it comes to the masjid, they'll put the radiator on full blast. Why? Because it's not their money, it's everybody else's money. So that is wasting money. You're not Hafiz then. So you have to be Hafiz, you have to be careful there that when it comes to mosque related issues, you don't waste the wealth. Because it's everybody's property, it's not your property, it's not your mal, it's his, it's that sisters there, it's that brothers there. People who may not be living in this area, but they may have donated for this masjid, it's their property as well, they've got a right as well. So you can't waste waqf money, you can't waste donation money. So you have to be a Hafiz, you have to be a protector, and also you have to be Alim as well. And what I mean by Alim is in terms of you know where to spend it. Sometimes people are quite very careful when it comes to waqf money, but they don't know where to spend it. So they just look at the mosque and think, oh, this needs a bit of painting here, so just buy some paint and just do a bit of painting there. Or this needs here. They don't think where the money is required first. So these are the two qualities which trustees of masajid should kind of develop within themselves. That is Hafiz, being careful when it comes to where they spend it, not to waste the waqf money. And number two, they have to have knowledge in where to spend it and how to spend it. So these were the two qualities of Yusuf alayhi salam. Therefore, he put his name forward, and the king Rayyan bin Walid, his full name is, he then accepted Yusuf alayhi salam and then made him part of his cabinet, you could say, and he was his finance minister. Now some of you may be thinking, well, last week didn't we read Zulaykha's husband being the finance minister? Where on earth did he go? What happened to him? So basically, the finance minister, Zulaykha's husband, whose name was Kitfir, he actually passed away. So there was this post vacant in a way. And after Yusuf alayhi salam was made the finance minister, the king decided, or the king, well, you won't say decided, that'd be a bit more forceful, but he kind of suggested to Yusuf alayhi salam that you might as well marry Zulaykha. Because obviously Zulaykha before was married, and obviously she liked you, she tried to seduce you, tempt you, and so on, but as her husband has passed away, you might as well marry her. So he goes on to mention that Yusuf alayhi salam and Zulaykha got married. They had two sons. One was called Ephraim, and through the progeny of Ephraim you have a prophet called Yusha bin Nun alayhi salam, and he had another son called Masha, and he also had a daughter, Yusuf alayhi salam, whose name was Rahma, and Rahma was the wife of Hazrat Ayyub alayhi salatu wasalam. So Ayyub alayhi salam's wife was Rahma, and I think it's a story you will look at later on, or a prophet you will look at later on in the series. Now just one particular point about Yusuf alayhi salam and Zulaykha, that when Yusuf alayhi salam married Zulaykha, he loved Zulaykha a lot. So before marriage, it was Zulaykha loving and liking Yusuf alayhi salam. But after marriage, it was Yusuf alayhi salam loving and liking Zulaykha, whereas Zulaykha wasn't giving that same love and like back to Yusuf alayhi salam. So once Yusuf alayhi salam said to Zulaykha that, look, before we got married, you were after me, Now we got married. This is a lawful nikah, lawful relations. And now, I like you, I love you, but you're not showing that same love and like back to me. So Zulaykha replied by saying that after I married you, I now love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than you. Because obviously she now became a wife of a prophet, and through that way her connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala became stronger, because of which she now loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than Yusuf alayhi salam. So that's one point about Yusuf alayhi salam and Zulaykha. Now the story continues that as Yusuf alayhi salam mentioned or predicted that 7 years there was good crops, heavy rains, and the next 7 years it was very, very harsh, severe famine. People from Egypt were coming to this newly made public treasury, the Baytul Mal, to collect grains and crops. Even people from outside where the famine had spread were coming to Egypt to collect grains and crops. Now the famine was so severe that it spread all the way to Canaan, where Yaqub alayhi salam and his 10 sons were. And news also reached them that in Egypt there's a person, a very nice person, a very kind minister, who if you go to him, he gives you 1 camel load of grains. So in other words, that you give him a bit of money, a bit of cash and gold, the finance minister of Egypt will give each person 1 camel load of grains. So this news reached Yaqub alayhi salam and to his 10 sons. Now what happened was that after Yusuf alayhi salam had allegedly been eaten by the wolves, Yaqub alayhi salam became attached to Binyamin, Yusuf alayhi salam's real brother. So Yaqub alayhi salam said to the other 10 sons that, look, you go and get some grains and crops for us, and I'll keep Binyamin back here and I will look after him. So the 10 brothers, they traveled from Canaan and they went to Egypt, and they go to this public treasury where they see Yusuf alayhi salam. فَدَخَلُوا عَلَيْهِ فَعَرَفَهُمْ وَهُمْ لَهُ مُنْكِرُونَ, which means that Yusuf alayhi salam recognized them, but they did not recognize Yusuf alayhi salam. Now Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says that 40 years had passed. Yusuf alayhi salam was thrown into the well when he was 7. So 40 years had passed since the moment when he was thrown into the well and this first meeting of the brothers and Yusuf alayhi salam. So Yusuf alayhi salam recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Now, what was why was that the case? Obviously, 2 reasons scholars have mentioned. One reason is that the ministers in those days, when they would speak to people, they would have a kind of a metal veil over them. They will have a kind of metal covering over them. So Yusuf alayhi salam was able to see the brothers and recognize them, but they weren't able to see Yusuf alayhi salam properly because of that metal veil, and they couldn't recognize him. So that's one opinion some scholars have mentioned. Or another reason, another simple reason could be that, remember, they threw Yusuf alayhi salam into the well when he was a baby, a 7-year-old kid. And now Yusuf alayhi salam was 47 years old. So as you can imagine, from a 7-year-old child growing up to a 47-year-old man, there's going to be a lot of difference, isn't there, in terms of color, in terms of certain things will probably be the same, but in terms of features, there's going to be a drastic change. Say, then if it was a person who you last saw when he was 50, or when he was, say, 40, and now you see him when he's 80, more or less the features will be the same. But for a child growing from a young boy into a young man or an old man of 47 years old, the features going to change dramatically. So therefore Yusuf alayhi salam was able to recognize them, but they weren't able to recognize Yusuf. Now Yusuf alayhi salam, he recognized them, but he wasn't sure. So he wanted to ask some questions just to make sure that are they really his brothers. So they asked him, you're not Egyptians, are you? Because you're talking to me in Hebrew. So they said, yeah, we're not Egyptians. We've come from Canaan. So then Yusuf alayhi salam asked, okay, how many, who's your father's name? How many brothers do you have? So the brothers said, my father's name is Yaqub alayhi salatu wassalam, and he had 12 sons. That's what they said, that he had 12 sons. One of them is with him. We 10 are here. And then we had another brother, or he had another son who was eaten up by wolves. So obviously Yusuf alayhi salam then clicked on that, actually, they are my brothers. So obviously Yusuf alayhi salam treated them nicely. He didn't obviously, arrest them straight away. He just treated them nicely. He said, okay, fair enough. And he gave them nice places to stay in his court, in his palace. And thereafterwards, Yusuf alayhi salam, he said that I will give you the grains and the crops, but next time you need to bring Binyamin with you. Otherwise, if you don't bring Binyamin, فَلَا كَيْلَ لَكُمْ, there will be no measurement for you, i.e. there will be no crops or grains for you. So I'm giving it to you this time, but you need to bring Binyamin next time, otherwise no crops, no grains. And then Yusuf alayhi salam told one of his workers that the money or the gold or the jewelry they gave to buy the grains and the crops, put it back into their bags. So put it into their bags, and then obviously they'll take their bags without them realizing that we've done that, and they'll also take the grains and the crops as well. Now you may be thinking to yourself that why did Yusuf alayhi salam do that for in particular? Why did he say to the workers to give back their money? Now again, there was wisdom behind that. Yusuf alayhi salam, if he had taken money from them, they could use that as an excuse that when they returned back, look, we want to go back to Egypt with Binyamin, but we got no money, so we can't do anything, we have to just stay here. But he returned the money back and gave them free grains and crops with the intention that they'll have no excuses for not coming back. They can't use money as an excuse now. Because obviously if he had taken their money, then when they go back to Canaan, they could say, well, we want to go back and take Binyamin, but we got no money, we've got no gold and jewelry. So how on earth are we going to buy more crops or more grains? We just have to stay here. So what he did was that he returned the he returned the money, the jewelry back with the intention that then they've got no other excuse for not coming back. They'll have to come back now because he promised, he gave them free crops and grains, and he's also returned their money back, so then they will have to come back to obviously purchase or to take more grains and more crops. So that was the wisdom behind Yusuf alayhi salam returning the money. Now when the brothers, they took the crops, the grains, they went to Yaqub alayhi salam. They said to Yaqub alayhi salam that look, the finance minister, he wants to see Binyamin, and he said, and he warned us that look, if we don't take Binyamin, then that's it, there's no more crops for us anymore. So Yaqub alayhi salam at first said, or he kind of said that look, I don't want to send him with you because you promised me with Yusuf alayhi salam that you're going to bring him back. So I don't have any peace or safety that you are going to return Binyamin. So the brothers kind of promised and so on that, no, definitely this time we will bring Binyamin. Then they opened their bags and they saw the gold and the jewelry which they had given to purchase the grains and the crops. They saw the gold and the jewelry in the bags. So then they said to Yaqub alayhi salam that look how kind this minister is. He's not going to harm Binyamin. Look, he's so kind. He gave us so much grains and crops. On top of that, he's returned our gold and jewelry back. look how kind this person is. He's not going to hurt a fly, let alone hurt Binyamin or do anything sinister against Binyamin. So Yaqub alayhi salam said to the sons that, okay, I will let Binyamin go with you, but the condition is that you need to take a pledge. And the pledge is that you are going to bring Binyamin back, illa ayyuhata bikum, unless something happens, i.e. unless you are overpowered. In other words, unless like you die or you get killed or something happens that you can't bring Binyamin back, that's okay. But I want you to take a pledge that you are going to try your utmost best to return Binyamin back to me. So the brothers, they took this pledge. Thereafterwards, Yaqub alayhi salam gave the sons another beautiful advice, nasiha, and he said to the sons, La tadkhulu min babin wahidin, that this time when you enter Egypt, don't enter Egypt through one gate. Don't, all 10 of you, or all 11 of you, sorry, don't go into Egypt through one entrance. وَادْخُلُوا مِنْ أَبْوَابٍ مُتَفَرِّقَةٍ, but enter Egypt through many gates, through different entrances. Now question rises here as to why did Yaqub alayhi salam give this particular advice, that don't enter Egypt through one entrance but enter Egypt through many entrances. Now the reason why is to save his sons from the evil eye. Yusuf alayhi salam, we mentioned last week, he was beautiful. The brothers were also beautiful as well. Obviously not as beautiful or as handsome as Yusuf alayhi salam, but they had a bit of Yusuf alayhi salam, if that makes sense, in terms of they were a bit beautiful as well. So now Yaqub alayhi salam feared that if all 11 of them were to enter Egypt through one entrance, the people would be like looking at the brothers. And there's a danger by them looking or staring at the 11 brothers in a way, looking at their nice fair skin, that it could lead to one of them getting the evil eye and falling ill and falling sick. So therefore Yaqub alayhi salam ordered that make sure they enter through different gates so that you don't get their attention. You don't get the attention of people. Obviously the evil eye, remember this is mentioned in the hadith, al-aynu haqqun, which means that the evil eye is haqq, which means it's true. In other words, that if you look at someone in a way, like for example somebody is beautiful or handsome, and you look at that person, just like looking at him in a way, admiring him more about his features, about his face, about his fair skin, as mentioned in the hadith, it could lead to that person falling ill and falling sick. And it's not just about features, it could be something like, say, somebody's car even. That somebody's got a car and you look at somebody's car in an evil way, or I wish I had that car, then something may happen to that person's car. So we call that the evil eye. Obviously it's a very detailed discussion. Obviously we don't have the time to go into any detail now. But just one thing to remember, as mentioned in the hadith, al-aynu haqqun, that the evil eye is haqq and true. So to save his brothers from, to save his sons from the evil eye, Yaqub alayhi salam ordered that you enter Egypt through different entrances. Now the story continues that the 11 sons, the 11 brothers, they went to meet Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf alayhi salam took Binyamin to one side. In other words, he made Binyamin stay with him, and he gave the 10 brothers another place to stay. Thereafterwards, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was alone with Binyamin, he disclosed himself. In other words, he told Binyamin that, look, it's me, it's Yusuf, your real brother. At which point Binyamin was very happy to see Yusuf alayhi salam after all these years. Thereafterwards, Binyamin told Yusuf alayhi salam that, look, you know what, I don't want to go back to Egypt. I don't want to go back to Canaan. Why don't I want to go back to Canaan? Is because since you left, or you left the family, the brothers have been abusing me. because the same way they would abuse you, because Yaqub alayhi salam loved you the most, since you've gone, I've become the beloved to Yaqub alayhi salam. So the brothers have been jealous and the brothers been abusing me. So Yusuf alayhi salam then remembered his youth, or he remembered his young age, when he was being like ridiculed by his brothers, when he was being abused and tortured by his brothers, and he felt sorry and pity for his younger brother Binyamin, and he didn't want Binyamin to go through the same harrowing experience he went through. Obviously, in a way, when you look at it, he got away lightly in terms of at least he was alive, but what could stop the brothers from actually killing Binyamin? What could stop the brothers if they get really, really angry and really, really mad to actually take Binyamin one day with them and basically kill him and just leave him there, and again make up another story that a wolf or something had ate Binyamin? So Yusuf alayhi salam didn't want Binyamin, who, remember by the way, is his own real brother, to go through that same harrowing experience. So he then thought of a plan to keep Binyamin with him. So the plan Yusuf alayhi salam came up with was that he hid a container, an expensive container, in the bag of Binyamin, in Binyamin's bag. And the idea was that when the brothers and Binyamin will be leaving the following day, Yusuf alayhi salam will call out that I've lost my container, and then obviously check the bags and then find out who's been stealing it or who stole it. So that was the plan or the idea of Yusuf alayhi salam. So the following day exactly happened that the brothers were about to leave when Yusuf alayhi salam cried out that, look, I can't find my container, this container, where is it gone? So he then called the brothers to his palace. Yusuf alayhi salam then checked the bags, and then he found the container in Binyamin's bag. Now the ayat then goes on to explain مَا كَانَ لِيَأْخُذَ أَخَاهُ فِي دِينِ الْمَلِكِ, which means that Yusuf alayhi salam would not have been able to keep Binyamin according to the law of Egypt, according to the Egyptian law. Now what does that mean? Basically, a couple of points here. Egyptian law dictated that if somebody is caught stealing, you just lash him a few times. Thereafterwards, what he stole, so just say if he stole something which was worth £10, he will have to give a financial penalty double of what he stole. So he stole something worth £10, he will have to give £20, and then that's it, he's released. But according to the law of Yaqub alayhi salam, or Yaqub alayhi salam Sharia, was that anyone who is caught stealing, that person, the sadiq, the thief, is made into a slave of the person who he stole from. So that's what this particular text is telling us, that Binyamin wouldn't have been able to keep, Yusuf alayhi salam wouldn't have been able to keep Binyamin according to Egyptian law, because Egyptian law would have said, or just beat him up a bit, and after he pays the penalty, just free him. So Yusuf alayhi salam said to the brothers that, look, I'm not implementing Egyptian law here, I'm implementing your own Sharia, the Sharia of your father Yaqub alayhi salam, which is that if a thief is caught, he's made into a slave, he's made into a gulam. So therefore Yusuf alayhi salam, he then kept Binyamin, and he said, look, I'm not going to release him, I'm going to keep Binyamin. Now obviously you could imagine that the brothers, they were like shocked, and also there was that thing in the back of their mind that, look, we promised our father Yaqub that we're going to bring him, you know, we're not going to make any story of this time, we're definitely going to bring him back, but this has happened. So they were like frustrated, they were agitated. They said, look, king, you know, like, take one of us and release Binyamin, take one of us, and you know, we are more stronger than Binyamin. Whatever you want us to do at home, in your palace, we'll do it, take one of us, but at least release Binyamin for the sake of their father. So Yusuf alayhi salam was saying that, look, how can I do that? I'll be committing zulm and oppression, that I'm convicting someone other than the actual thief. So the brothers were very frustrated, they were agitated, which led to them saying that, look, yasrik, that if Binyamin had stolen, if we don't believe that he did do this, but if he had done it, then look, it's not his fault. There's a precedent here, and the precedent is that his brother, i.e. Yusuf alayhi salam, had stolen before. فَقَدْ سَرَقَ أَخُ لَهُ مِنْ قَبْلِ, i.e. his brother, Yusuf alayhi salam, had stolen before. Now what is this particular line is explaining? What's it trying to say? Basically what the brothers were saying is that, look, Binyamin didn't steal. Look, you need to forgive Binyamin for this. He didn't steal. But if you are saying that he did steal, again, it's not his fault. He had a real brother called Yusuf. He once stole before, and I think he's probably learnt it from him. Sometimes it happens that in a family, if there's a brother who messes around, who's into drugs and so on, and then he's got a younger brother who does the same, we kind of say, well, oh, he's learning it from his brother, or his brother's teaching him, just forgive him. So exactly here that the brothers were saying that, look, first and foremost, we don't believe that he stole, but if he did, there's a precedent here in terms of he had a brother before called Yusuf, and he stole, so I think perhaps he probably learnt it from him. So just forgive him, he's only a young child, he's only a young person. It's actually his brother Yusuf who kind of taught him how to steal. Now this obviously leads to a question here that, okay, did Yusuf alayhi salam actually steal? Now what this story is referring to, because we mentioned before, prophets, they all masoom in terms of sinless, they don't commit any sins. What does this mean that Yusuf alayhi salam before was convicted of stealing? Now the story, which is not mentioned obviously in the Quran, but it's mentioned in the books of tafsir, that there was an incident. Yusuf alayhi salam, he did not steal, but the brothers, obviously they had nothing, no straws to clutch onto. They kind of made an incident. It was a true incident, but Yusuf alayhi salam was innocent, but they kind of attached that blame to Yusuf alayhi salam. And the incident, just very quickly, what happened was that according to certain scholars or certain mufassirin, when Yusuf alayhi salam was born, then obviously Binyamin was born, Yaqub alayhi salam's second wife, who I mentioned in last week's lesson, whose name was Rahil, she passed away. So what happened, Yusuf alayhi salam was being looked after by his paternal aunt. In other words, Yaqub alayhi salam's sister. So she was looking after Yusuf. Now because Yusuf alayhi salam was such a beautiful baby, that she didn't want to give up Yusuf alayhi salam. So even when Yaqub alayhi salam, the father, was asking for his son back, the auntie was saying, no, I don't want to give him back. But obviously she had to give him back, because obviously he's the father, he had more rights over Yusuf alayhi salam than the actual auntie herself. So what did the auntie do? She got a waistband or a waist wrapper. She then tied it around Yusuf alayhi salam's waist, covered Yusuf alayhi salam with a qameez, with some dresses, with some clothes, and then sent Yusuf alayhi salam to Yaqub. Now when Yusuf alayhi salam was being sent, she then cried out, oh, I've lost my waist wrapper, I can't find my waistband. And then she accused Yusuf alayhi salam. I think Yusuf alayhi salam had stolen it. So they went to Yusuf alayhi salam, they check his waist, and they find that wrapper there. So what's the law according to Yaqub alayhi salam? That if you are caught stealing, you are then made a slave of the person who you stole from. So in that way, the auntie then managed to get custody of Yusuf alayhi salam. So when you look at it, the brothers knew that Yusuf alayhi didn't steal anything. The auntie made it, everybody knew that the auntie just did this. So, but because they had no straws to clutch onto, they just said, oh, Yusuf alayhi salam stole it. So to then obviously back themselves up that look, hopefully the king or the final minister may listen to them and free Binyamin. But obviously Yusuf alayhi salam did not listen to them, and he said, look, I can't do anything about it. So the brothers, obviously, they left the palace. They got together and they were doing mashwara. They were thinking to themselves, okay, what can we do now? So the eldest brother, who I mentioned in last week's lesson, whose name was Yehuda, he said to the brothers that, look, I can't face my father again anymore. We went to him once. We made up a story about Yusuf alayhi salam being eaten by wolves. We broke his heart once. I can't go again with another story and break his heart the second time. So the eldest brother Yehuda, he said, you know what, I'm just going to stay in Egypt. I'm not going to go back. I can't go back and show my face to my father Yaqub alayhi salam. And it's what we call in Urdu, sharam or haya. Sometimes we don't realize that we hurt our parents, but we then have the audacity to then go and see them again, as like nothing has happened. But even Yehuda, he felt so bad that we broke his heart once. Now we're going to go again and break his heart the second time. I can't do that. I'm just going to stay here in Egypt until he allows me to go back to Canaan, or something happens to me, I die in Egypt, then so be it. But I'm not going to go back and show my face to my father. So Yehuda remained in Egypt. The other brothers said, look, we have to tell our father what exactly happened, that Binyamin has been convicted of stealing. He's now in Egypt and we have to tell him the truth. So the brothers, they went back to Yaqub alayhi salam, told Yaqub alayhi salam of what happened. Again, Yaqub alayhi salam didn't believe them. He said what he exactly said to the brothers after the Yusuf alayhi salam incident. Bal sawwalat lakum anfusukum amrada. Your soul, your nafs has seduced you to do something against Binyamin. Now at that time, Yaqub alayhi salam knew that actually this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He knew that, because what happened was that over the years, Yaqub alayhi salam has been crying, and he's also lost his eyesight as well. Constantly crying and thinking about Yusuf alayhi salam. He lost his eyesight. So he kind of knew that, you know what, this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as mentioned in a hadith of Tirmidhi, Ashaddun nasi bala'an al-anbiya, which means that the ones who are more severely tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are the prophets. So in other words, those who are more closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they get tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even more. So Yaqub alayhi salam, being a prophet and a messenger of Allah, he knew that this was a test from Allah. Allah firstly taking Yusuf alayhi salam away and now taking Binyamin away. This is nothing except a test from Allah. So Yaqub alayhi salam knew that it was a test. So he then said to the brothers that return, Ya bani yazhabu, that O sons, izhabu, go, fatahassasu, and look for Yusuf wa akhihi, and his brother, wala tayasu min rohillah, and do not be disheartened from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. So in other words, Yaqub alayhi salam, because he knew that it was a test from Allah, he knew that Yusuf alayhi salam is somewhere alive. He knew obviously Binyamin's alive, and he knew that Yehuda, who also kept himself back in Egypt, they're all alive. So he wanted to see them again, and he wanted the family to be reunited. So he said to his remaining 9 sons that go back to Egypt and obviously look for Yusuf, look for Binyamin, and bring them back to me. So the brothers, they got together. Obviously remember, they had no clue where Yusuf alayhi salam was, but they knew where Binyamin and where Yehuda was. That was in Egypt. So now they go back to Egypt the 3rd time. So this time the brothers, they go to Egypt, And when they go to Egypt this time, they're in a very broken state. Like they hadn't eaten for days, because last time when they went the second time, because they were convicted of stealing, the king did not give them any grains and any crops. So they're now going back to Egypt in a broken state. Imam Qurtubi rahimahullah mentions that this third occasion, Yaqub alayhi salam gave the brothers a letter to give to the finance minister of Egypt, to give to Yusuf alayhi salam. And in this letter it's mentioned, Yaqub alayhi salam wrote himself, that in this letter is mentioned that we, our family, is a family who has gone through many hardships. My great grandfather Ibrahim alayhi salam was thrown into the fire. My grandfather Ishaq alayhi salam was tested by Allah, i.e. he was about to be slaughtered by his father Ibrahim. Because according to another opinion, the Zabih, i.e. the person, the prophet was going to be slaughtered, it wasn't Ismail, it was Ishaq alayhi salam. And then Yaqub alayhi salam wrote about himself that I have been tested by my first son Yusuf alayhi salam, and I lost my eyesight because of him, and now I've lost another son, Binyamin, accused of stealing and thieving. And then Yaqub alayhi salam wrote that, look, our family is a family of prophets, and our family is not a family of thieves or stealing or bad people. So when Yusuf alayhi salam read this particular letter, tears flowed from his eyes, and he thought that, look, this is the time when I think I should disclose the secret to the brothers. So he then said to the brothers that, can you remember what you did to Yusuf alayhi salam, or can you remember what you did to Yusuf? So the brothers, they were taken aback by this question. Yusuf, how on earth does the finance minister, how on earth does the Aziz and Misr know about Yusuf alayhi salam? Yusuf alayhi salam is a secret which only us, 10 of us, and Yusuf alayhi salam knows. So now when they looked at the finance minister closely, they thought to themselves that this person can't be Yusuf. Is it that same Yusuf who we threw into the well? Is it that same Yusuf وَأَسَرُّهُ بِضَاعَ we sold as merchandise? Is it that same Yusuf who we mocked and ridiculed and made fun out of? Is it that same Yusuf who saw a dream of the 11 stars and the sun and the moon prostrating in front? Is it that same Yusuf who we kind of made him the butt of all jokes, and now he is the finance minister of a country like Egypt? It can't be the same Yusuf. So the brothers then asked, are you Yusuf? So Yusuf alayhi salam replied by saying, yes, I am Yusuf. He, I Binyamin, he is my brother. And then قَدْ مَنَّ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا, and indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does man, i.e. ihsan, i.e. goodness upon us. And he then goes on to say that إِنَّهُ مَن يَتَّقِي وَيَصْبِرْ, that those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and those who are patient, وَيَصْبِرْ, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards them. So that was the moment when, Yusuf alayhi salam told the brothers. You could imagine that the brothers were taken aback, they were shocked, they asked for forgiveness from Yusuf alayhi salam. Obviously it's coming up later on that Yusuf alayhi salam said that, look, it wasn't your fault. What you did to me, it wasn't your fault. Again, this is Yusuf alayhi salam's amazing characteristic akhlaq, that he was saying even then he didn't take revenge. Even then he wasn't saying it was your fault. He was saying that this was just between shaitan. Shaitan got between you guys and me. It was shaitan who caused the hatred and the hasad and between me. So he told them not to worry about it. He told them that, look, we need to get our father Yaqub alayhi salam here. Then afterwards, Yusuf alayhi salam, as I mentioned in last week's lesson, he took out the qamis from that tube, and he then gave that qamis to the brothers to then give it to Yaqub alayhi salam. Yusuf alayhi salam telling the brothers that, look, go and take this to Yaqub alayhi salam, tell him to wipe his face with it, and his eyesight will return. So that was as I explained, this qamis, it was the qamis which Ibrahim alayhi salam had when he was thrown into the fire. It passed from generation to generation all the way up to Yusuf alayhi salam. It's mentioned in some books of tafsir that Yehuda, the eldest son, he took this qamis, he took this shirt back to Yaqub alayhi salam. Why? What's the significance behind that? Is because it was Yehuda, the eldest son, who took the qamis smeared with blood of Yusuf alayhi salam the first time. So because he broke his heart, he broke the heart of his father Yaqub alayhi salam the first time, he wanted to now please his father by taking the qamis of Yusuf alayhi salam. Now he then goes on to explain that the qamis was then taken, Yaqub alayhi salam's eyesight was returned. Thereafter preparations was made to take Yaqub alayhi salam and his entire family. So not just only the brothers, also the brothers' wives, their children, everyone. They all went to Egypt, and in Egypt they met Yusuf alayhi salam. Thereafter, the brothers, they then fell into prostration. They fell into prostration, and that is the interpretation of the dream Yusuf alayhi salam. So I mentioned last week's lesson, Inni ra'aytu ahada ashara kawkaban, 11 stars, the sun and the moon. They were prostrating in front of Yaqub in front of Yusuf alayhi salam. Thereafter, Yusuf alayhi salam reminded his father that, look, this is the interpretation of the dream. This is the dream which I saw, and this is now the interpretation. Obviously, the story concludes there. Obviously, what happened afterwards is not mentioned in the Holy Quran, but it's mentioned in the books of tafsir that thereafterwards, it's mentioned that 80 years, that was the difference, the time span from Yusuf alayhi salam being thrown into the well and Yaqub alayhi salam meeting him. The brothers met him after 40 years, but 80 years was the time limit between Yaqub alayhi salam last seeing Yusuf alayhi salam and meeting Yusuf alayhi salam again. And it's mentioned that Yusuf alayhi salam, he passed away at the age of 120. He passed away at the age of 120. Yaqub alayhi salam passed away before, and when Yaqub alayhi salam passed away, he told Yusuf alayhi salam that, look, I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want to be buried in Canaan with my father Ishaq alayhi salam. So it's mentioned in the books of tafsir that when Yaqub alayhi salam passed away, his body, his coffin was taken all the way back to Canaan, and he was buried there. As for Yusuf alayhi salam, as I mentioned, that he passed away at the age of 120, and he was buried near the river Nile. Now he then goes on to explain that when Musa alayhi salam was taking the Banu Israel out of Egypt and into Palestine, Sham, Syria area, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Musa alayhi salam to dig the grave of Yusuf alayhi salam near the river Nile and take his body and coffin to Canaan or to Palestine, and then bury him alongside Ishaq alayhi salam and his father Yaqub alayhi salam. So this is what Musa alayhi salam did. So when they were leaving Egypt, when they were being chased by the Fir'aun and his army, so they took the body of Yusuf alayhi salam and they buried Yusuf alayhi salam alongside his father and his grandfather Ishaq alayhi salam. So remember, that is the story about Yusuf alayhi salam. Remember, what we can understand from here is the importance of sabr and patience. As Allah says, that as long as you have taqwa and piety and you fear and you have sabr, then inshallah Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you. May Allah gives the tawfiq to act on what has been said. Wa akhiru da'wan alhamdulillah.
Inshallah, the series of the life of the prophets will continue.